Good morning and a big hello from Singapore. First of all, it's my honor and pleasure to be part of the Jakarta Medical Education Conference 2015. I would like to personally thank Dr. Adipriyanti and the organizing committee for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts during the plenary session on selection of undergraduate and postgraduate medical and health professional students. Now, before I go into my presentation, I would like to share with you where I come from. I'm from the Center for Medical Education at Yong Loo Lin School of Medicine, National University Health System. Our main area of focus is basically developing our faculty through faculty development and educational scholarship. The focus of my presentation is to highlight the best practices and future trends in medical and health professional student selections. During my discussion, I will be sharing some of the concepts and constructs, applied practices and good examples, issues and challenges faced when you institute a selection process, and of course, the future trends. But before we move in to the nitty-gritty of selections, let's ask ourselves the question, why do we need to select? Well, these are two pictures from my medical school, very early days, the School of Medicine in Singapore, which was established in 1905, and we just celebrated our 110th year of establishment. Now, the student enrollment during that time was 23 per year. It was a very simple, straightforward selection process from a handful of candidates. Also, let us look at the practice of medicine. Now, this painting, The Doctor by Luke Fildes, a contemporary of Charles Dickens, exemplifies how medicine was practiced in the 18th, 19th, and the early part of the 20th century. The most important part of practice of medicine was that the practice of medicine was centered around the doctor. It was fact and content-based learning during the medical school. Learning was mostly by the apprenticeship. You follow the master and you learn from the wisdom of the master. You build your knowledge from your own individual experience. The cases that you saw, from the clinical decisions and diagnoses that you made from your wealth of experience as you practiced. And one of the key features was that most of the learning was complete at the end of formal training. But now let us fast forward ourselves to the 21st century. Now, these are some pictures from the Yong Loo Lin School of Medicine just this year. And the number of students just shortlisted for admission selections are over 900. And from that, we select about 300 students per year. The practice of medicine is also very different. Now, most of the practice is not by knowing everything, but turning problems into questions and then learn by questioning. You complement your experience with knowledge from evidence-based data, and then you learn to work, and also you learn to be with teams. Now, this is what we call team competence. You never practice alone, but you're always with a team, and then you construct knowledge and you continue your learning. The learning never stops. So the skills that are required are very different. The attributes of a medical student and a future doctor are completely different from what it was 18th century or 19th century. So therefore, let's look at the intent of our selection processes. Well, there are two main intent. Well, the first is to identify and select the candidates who will be the best future healthcare providers or practitioners. Now, this is the ideal. Now, this is the distal criterion. Unfortunately, none of the selection tools at the moment have very strong data to back this up. However, this is our ultimate criterion, or what we call the distal criterion. But what is more closer or what we call the proximal criterion, is to identify and select those individuals who will perform well in medical school or health professional school and complete their training. Now this is very different. If we go back to the attributes of our needed for a good practitioner, good future practitioner and a medical student from the last 3 or 4 slides that I shared, this is extremely important that we select the right individual. However, there are other factors which will influence our selection processes. First of all, there's this thing called the widening access, the term used to provide fair access to professions from students from disadvantaged backgrounds. For example, disadvantaged socio-cultural background, economic background, or differently abled, physically differently abled students. And also, our selection processes could be influenced by some strategic factors. For example, selection based on specific agenda or necessity. As most of you will know, that until quite recently, till about 1990s, there was a move where there were more male students were selected to do medicine than female students in the region. And that was also a strategic focus based on the country needs or a specific program needs, etc. Now, with that, let us look at some of the attributes or what are some of the principles that we need to base our selection processes. We discussed what are the features or what is the intent of our selection processes. Now, if those are the intent, the proximal and the distal criterion, what are the principles that we base this or the attributes of the entire selection process? First of all, our selection process must have the validity or the relevance. Now here, 3 are very important. First of all, content validity. Whatever the constructs that we look at or whatever the content that we put in must be valid. Secondly, the construct validity. The construct validity is the criterion that we develop for that particular construct to be an effective medical student, be able to complete the studies, be empathetic or be professional, etc. And then, of course, the third is the predictive validity. How valid my selection processes and the tools are predicting the success in medical schools or success as a future practitioner. So these are the 3 important, I think, the criterion or what we call the basic psychometrics of an assessment process. The second is the reliability or consistency or stability of our selection processes. Here too, 3 I think are very important. First of all, the test, retest reliability, which basically means that the results are consistent. You can't have your selection processes selecting a bunch of candidates and then if you run the same or very similar tests again sometime later, that you get a different results. So therefore, test retest is again paramount in selection processes. Second is the inter-rater or inter-observer reliability. That is, if you use more than one observer, both more or less have the concurrence of getting the similar results or grading. And then finally, the internal consistency or the stability of that particular station or the particular tool. Not only these 2 are important when we look at the principles of psychometrics in our assessment processes, but also what is important is the acceptability by the stakeholders. Are the stakeholders satisfied with the assessment process? Do they think that it is fair? So looking into this is also extremely important. And then finally, I think this is something that we tend to ignore and we get into trouble, is the practicality. The practicality is that you can have the most cutting edge assessment system or the selection processes in place, but if it is not possible because of high costs or the ground is not very well trained, or if the process is too resource intensive for that particular medical school, the entire assessment system or the process will flop. And what goes first is the reliability, because it's extremely difficult to run an efficient assessment system, especially with the large number of students applying to do medicine, and out of that quite a high proportion are very eligible to be selected into the medical school. So something that is really, really important is that to relook at the practicality of our assessment systems and processes. Now with this, I want to focus on an ideal selection process. And Fiona Patterson and Ferguson has nicely shared this ideal selection process in one of the ASME papers. And the first thing is that you need to develop a competency model. What are the constructs that you are looking for? What are the person specifications that you are looking for? And once you identify as a school or a system or a health care institution on the cognitive, the psychomotor, the affective domains of the proximal and the distal criterion, then you need to review and validate this data. So developing that competency model or the construct is extremely important. And once you do that, what they envisage is to advertise the places, share how it is done and what are you looking for, attract a good pool of applicants, and then inform the candidates about the selection process, be very clear, and then select out the unsuitable applicants, example by looking at the eligibility, etc., and select the students and trainees and rank them, shortlist the candidates who have ideal characteristics or attributes, and then of course you make selections. Provide feedback to the candidates is the final point. Now what is important is also is that once you do that, we realize that you can't have a single selection tool. It has to be multiple tools, and also looking at the target population in different facets by using multiple set of tools. And once you do that, you choose and design the appropriate selection methods and scoring systems. You pilot, validate, select the methods, and then of course you use this data once it is run to improve the system. I'm going to come back to this at the very late in my presentation and go through some of these items again. Okay, with that, what I would like to focus now are some of the selection formats that are available. Well, the very first and very extensively used and very popular for a long time are the secondary education grades. Now these are, like for example, the A levels or your GPA scores in high school, the IGCSE or the International Baccalaureate exams, etc. So these are the high school grades, how you perform in your school. This is also technically is known as what we call the crystallized knowledge, the knowledge specific to a content area. And what we see from the extensive studies done, especially in this area, that the crystallized knowledge, or what we call the secondary education grades, show some moderate correlation with medical school performances. Now this is especially so in the early years, where in the medical school the content area is basically focused on the cognitive or the cognitive skills domains, the basic medical science years. As the student matures into the clinical years, the correlation drops, and there's little known with future performance as a doctor or a health professional. It is also seen that especially in some countries, there's strong evidence of socio-economic bias of looking at the secondary education grades alone and ranking it according to the grade points. Now this is especially in UK, you see that there has been studies of showing this particular attribute. It's also true because, as you know, that if the students go to a school with a lot of facilities, with good teachers, and if the student cohort, in particular student cohort, if they have external help in getting through their A-levels, like extra tuition, where the parents can afford, giving them additional tuition, additional coaching, those students will score much better than the rest of the cohort. So this is why that there is some concern, especially in places like UK and the West, that just solely focusing on the secondary education grades can sometimes give wrong results in the selection processes. The second set of tools are the aptitude tests. Now these are the medical college admission tests, or MCAT, the biomedical admission test, BMATs, UK clinical aptitude test. These are some of the popular ones, and they're becoming quite popular as well. What they do is that they test the ability to acquire knowledge or skills, and this is called the fluid knowledge. The first part of A-level results and the high school, secondary high school results focuses on crystallized knowledge, whereas the aptitude test, the focus is on what we call the fluid knowledge, or the knowledge that the ability for the candidate to acquire knowledge or skill sets. And these show fairly good predictive validity, again during the early medical school years. This is quite strong. One of the strong points for including aptitude tests is that the studies show that it may improve widening access to medicine, because it does not have this issue of being coached for a particular essay, particular test. So again, aptitude tests are widely used now, and it is becoming quite popular. It shows some good predictive validity, again during the early medical school years, as well as the students mature into their clinical years. And the real important part of it is that it looks at the acquired knowledge part, or ability for the candidate to acquire knowledge and skill sets in that particular area. The third are the essays and personal statements. Again, this is quite widely used and popular. There is conflicting evidence on the predictability, and it is poor in validity and reliability. Now, the main problem here is that you do not know the essay submitted or the personal statement, bio statements about yourself submitted are really written by you or got written by someone else. So if the submissions are not done under standardized conditions, it may not reflect the true nature of the candidate. So therefore, you need to be a bit careful in using personal essays and statements. And one other thing that the studies have shown is that it takes quite a lot of resources, the school resources, to go through these and then properly grade them or mark them and identify the key areas that they would like to look at in a particular candidate. The next tool I would like to highlight is the situational judgment test. Now, the situational judgment tests are basically what we call a role relevant scenarios. It's an MCQ with a scenario, and this scenario is very role relevant scenario, which means that it is in a particular, it looks at a particular role as a medical or as a junior student in a high school, or a particular scenario relating to ethics or professionalism in day-to-day practice, or not as a doctor or a health professional, but even as a lay person. And you ask the individuals to identify or rank the most appropriate responses against the ranking or the most appropriate response chosen by an expert in that particular field. So SJTs are now increasingly becoming popular. It has been shown by the studies that it has a high level of validity and reliability. It has also been shown, and this is why it is becoming popular, is it has a lesser impact on disadvantaged students. One of the downside to this is that it may be susceptible. Some studies have shown the susceptibility to coaching, and it may again incur high costs in the development process, because you need an expert team to develop the right scenarios, validate these scenarios, and to assemble it as a multiple choice exam. This is becoming quite popular in postgraduate education and in undergraduate education as well. Postgraduate education, this has been in place for quite some time in UK, especially in selecting candidates for postgraduate residency programs. Now, in this part of the region, I'm happy to share that at Yong Loo Lin School of Medicine, we use situational judgment tests as part of our repertoire of tools in selecting the candidates for our medical school. The multiple mini interviews are the next set of tools, again very widely used, and this was developed as an improvement over traditional interviews. As we all know, traditional interviews were quite common during the medical school selection processes, and it had very little reliability. Sometimes it also had very poor validity as well, because the examiners, if it is especially unstructured, can ask any question under the sun. So therefore, to improve this, the multiple mini interview format was developed. Basically, the multiple mini interviews uses an OSCE format, Objective Structured Clinical Examination format. It is usually a one-to-one interviewer, 5 to 9 minutes with 9 stations, giving quite a good reliability. It has been shown to have moderate to high correlation with clinical outcome markers, especially in the undergraduate and postgraduate OSCE scores. There has been quite a number of studies, especially by Kevin Iwa and the co-workers, showing quite a good correlation with the admission multiple mini interviews and the OSCE scores, even in clinical years. The downside to this is that it is resource intensive. It's just like running an OSCE. But imagine running an OSCE for a large number of applicants compared to the applicants once they're in the medical school running an OSCE. OSCE itself requires quite a lot of resources, and then when you multiply this by 3 or 4 times with the applicants, it may incur quite a lot of school resources. And to reduce this, in some medical schools, they are now using the online multiple mini interviews and different formats to reduce the costs and to make it more efficient. Now at Yong Loo Lin School of Medicine also, we use multiple mini interviews, and we call it the focus skills assessments, as our constructs are focusing on several areas, several constructs of a future practitioner and a medical student, and our interviews are developed according to those constructs. The final tool I want to share with you, the 2 tools actually, are the personality testing and the selection centers. Personality testing is quite popular, and at worldwide it is a $500 million industry, US dollars. Personality testing is not only used in medicine, but it is widely used in selecting candidates or choosing the right persons for different professions, including the government and military, like FBI and military intelligence, to various other professions. It shows good reliability and a moderate predictability. However, as you know, like Myers-Briggs and other personality testing tools, it is susceptible to coaching and faking responses, because it's your own response or perception with regard to particular question or item. And the standard tests, once developed, are off the shelf, and it could be quite expensive in the long term if you try to use it to a large cohort of applicant pool. The final selection tool is the selection centers. Now here what happens is that the candidates are given a particular task, and the trained observers observe them and rate the candidates working on a particular problem or task. They may have, the selection centers have good reliability, and it can predict performance, especially in the medical school or the health professional school. It is resource intensive, but however, even though it is resource intensive, it has a very high acceptability. Unfortunately, there are few studies available. Some of the centers, like even our sister medical school, the Duke Graduate Medical School, employs something very similar, because their learning is, especially in the first 2 years, team-based learning. And for team-based learning, you need a certain attributes of students. And also another good example of a selection center is Christian Medical School, Vellore, where before the students are selected, they spend, I think a couple of weeks with the teachers out in the community, working on community related projects and work. So therefore, by having these trained observers, observing them, especially if you have the faculty as the trained observers, it's a real plus point for this particular tool, and it shows good predictive performance, and also acceptability levels are quite high. With that, so how do we put all these things together, what we have discussed earlier, to develop a good selection process? Well, I want to roll back to Patterson and Ferguson's ideal framework, and looking at how to select using this particular framework. So to make it simple, what I would like to share with you is that, first of all, we need to be very clear in our intent. What are the constructs that we are looking at? The proximal as well as distal. What are the very important ones we want to focus? Now, these could be shaped or based on the needs of the community, needs of the profession, and needs of that particular health system. So you need to contextualize it. Just because that these are the constructs happening in United States or UK or in an Ivy League medical school or health professional school, we must not take it lock, stock and barrel. We need to see, we need to reflect back, we need to get our own people together and discuss what are the areas, what are the constructs, what are the main intent of my selection process should be, so that it is aligned to the proximal and the distal criterion that we discussed earlier. So once that is clear, once you develop these are the areas that we are going to focus on, then you need to discuss, so what are the things that I'm going to test, because you may not be able to test everything that you want. Some are practically possible, some are difficult. So within that, we need to identify the competencies. These are the ones that my assessment selection process is going to test. Once that is clear, then you need to decide on the process and the formats based on best evidence, our own experience, and the resources available to me and to my school. Planning the process and then pilot testing to validate the selection process is extremely important. Now, once that is done, this is part of quality control. You run the test, and then once you get the results, we need to engage in a post hoc analysis. A lot of the time, what I see in many places is that we place a lot of emphasis in the process at the beginning, but once we do the selections, there's very little post hoc analysis. We are not analyzing how well did the selection process went through, what are the strengths, what are the limitations, and what are the results. Now, based on that, we need to share these results and improve this process for next round. With that, let me come to some of the challenges and limitations. First of all, I think the biggest challenge is the resources. Resources in terms of the time, the people, and the expertise, as well as the funds. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, unless we have a very good idea of this, it is foolhardy to select the tools that we would like to without the necessary resources. Now, we need to plan for this at the very early stage and identify the resources needed and get them as early as possible. The next is that the issue of this particular area of that, are we selecting or are we biased in our selection process? Are our constructs trying inadvertently to select a mini-me? This famous film of mini-me, if you have not seen, in the 1970s, 80s, it was quite popular. I think a version came quite later as well. But are we trying to recreate another mini-me by this selection process? In that, we are actually narrowing the selection process and the selection of our future graduates based on what we want, what I want. So it's something that is being discussed from the previous times. So this is an area that there will be quite a lot of discussions and important area for us also to reflect upon. Now, what are some of the future trends? Well, there are a few things that we need to take into account before we discuss the future trends. Firstly, medicine and health professions are becoming ever more popular. As we see, the number of eligible students applying for few places are increasing every year. With that, the selection processes are coming under very close scrutiny by all stakeholders, not only from the faculty and the students and the profession, but also from the society, from the parents, from the politicians, from the decision makers, from the grassroots leaders. Everyone is looking very closely at how we select our medical students, our nursing students, and our allied health students. There is also pressure to be more inclusive and to reflect the society and the societal needs. So therefore, not only that the professions are becoming popular, but also the society is now more or less requires that the selection process or the future health professionals need to reflect the societal needs as well as the societal the composition, if I may say so. But with all this, what we are also seeing is that the allocated resources are getting limited, or it is getting quite scarce. So therefore, we need to be efficient, we need to develop systems that are practical, and we need to rethink out of the box how we select our future health professionals. So few things that I see. First of all, we are moving away from just single formats or using single tools like an interview or the high school results, and more the selections are being based on multiple formats, incorporating attributes that would test both the crystallized and the fluid intelligence, the cognitive domain, the psychomotor, and the affective domains as well. Another thing that is coming up in a big way, especially I see this not in medicine but in many other fields, but it's going to happen in medicine as well, is that the social media. People are not only looking at you during your interviews, during your selection tools, but also there are background checks once you are selected. Looking at your Facebook, looking at the LinkedIn, the Twitter feeds, etc., and trying to see whether you are appropriate person, especially in the professionalism category, for a future health professional. Student experience, again, this is something that is going to count in the future. A lot of students are taking time off or even a gap year in experiential learning, and this counts a lot. I see this in most of the admission interviews, as well as how they perform in situational judgment tests, in multiple mini interviews. Those students who have good exposure into health professions by doing voluntary work or getting involved in different health care projects, they score much better than the standard average student who is applying just from high school or just after a graduate degree. So the experience of students are going to count in the future. And I think in some schools, they may actively look at students who show genuine desire to be involved in healthcare professions and be a caring future practitioner. And of course, lastly, there is a shift I see in taking in more mature students and also including from disadvantaged groups. So this brings me to the final slide, the key take-home messages. Well, I have 3 key take-home messages. First of all, when you build your selection process, you need to be very clear what is the intent of your selections. And based on that, you need to develop your construct. This is extremely important because we need to be very clear with the intent of the selection processes. Secondly, there's no magic bullet. You have to use multiple tools or multiple formats, looking at different facets of your candidate and making a value decision on that particular candidate, whether is this the person whom we want to be selected into our medical school or health professional school, and ultimately to be successful and graduate as a future healthcare professional. And then the last thing is that we need to be practical in our approach. You can't have it all. So based on the resource availability and also the relevance, the contextual relevance to your health care system, we need to be practical in our approach and develop the systems and processes which can be supported by the resource availability for our medical school. With that, I again want to thank Dr. Ade Finianti and the team for inviting me for be part of this excellent Jakarta Medical Education Conference. And also, I would like to thank my colleague, Professor Paul Tambaya, for agreeing to step in at the last moment and be there in Jakarta at this moment. So thank you, Paul, for agreeing to be there. And of course, my colleagues at Center for Medical Education, as well as the Dean's Office at National University of Singapore, Yonglulin School of Medicine, for making all the arrangements for this video recording and the video conferencing as well. And finally, most importantly, thank you all for your kind attention. And also, my very last slide, I would like to invite all of you next year to the 13th Asia Pacific Medical Education Conference in January. I hope to see you all there. Thank you.